Trump. Old Donald Trump is going to give a great, awesome, incredible speech to the nation tonight, January 8th on Tuesday. He's got all the networks to air his immigration speech, but all the networks wouldn't air Obama's speech in 2014. But maybe it's because it was a different topic. No, he was speaking about immigration. So when Obama tells the media, hey, I got to, speak to the nation about this immigration problem, nobody gave a shit. Now that old President Donald J. Cunt, the Commander-in-Chief, there's several things I want to mention. This is about all of the policies of the American presidents, not all of them, but, the keys to the cornerstone, the most important ones. So, quickly, he had said that there's terrorism. In the last year, there was only 6 immigrants that were in the terrorism database that was stopped by CBP at the southern border in the first half of 2018. So, if CBP had thought that there was terrorists, then they would have actually put them in the terrorism database, right? But only 6 of the immigrants out of, the thousands, there's 25,000 families or so, and then there's 100,000 deportations out of all the, this incredible crisis. There's only 6 immigrants that was in the terrorism database. This is important because Donald Trump essentially can do whatever the fuck he wants because he's the emperor and we're at war. And when you're at war, as long as you can say that you're doing it in the interest of national security, as long as you're saying, if he could just somehow pull out any goddamn reason out of his ass, he's the president, so really just saving his own ass is saving the country, right? But if he could just pull out some reason why he wants to shut the border down, well, there's 6 immigrants, right, that's in the, all you need is one, right? You had one shooter in Las Vegas, took out 50 people, 60 people. So all you got to do is what? The terrorists have to come in here, find some cash, some weapons hole or some shit, and then just destroy it. So he might be able to use that as justification. I look at 6 and think, well, that ain't nothing. That's hardly anything. What, just in the terrorism database, so they're suspected terrorists. If they, who are they? What do they do? I mean, what, they crossed the border and then they had a bunch of C4 strapped on them? But he may use that as an excuse to, in the interest of national security, he's going to use emergency powers because this is a crisis at the border. So it's just interesting, right, how different the policy, again, the networks are going to air his speech, and they're going to give him coverage of all this time, and this is going to be the last time because, if he fucks them, if he spreads a whole bunch of lies and bullshit, and he's usually angry and spreads malice, and he's, just a fucking asshole, just spreading his fucking wicked assholeness all over the place. So, to begin with, before I get into the different policies of the different presidents, I just want to double down on that Donald Trump has the authority. He's got the power. We're in a war on terror, right, America? These damn terrorists. We got to spend trillions of dollars to stop terrorism. Trillions and trillions. And who cares if the Pentagon loses it all? Who gives a shit? It's not like trillions of dollars is thieving, right? But somebody steal Mountain Dew out of a convenience store, that person will get the shit kicked out of them. But $21 trillion, that ain't nothing. So we're spending all this money on this forever war, trillions of dollars, and it's bombing here, bombing there, bombing there. We're not in Rohingya. We're not in Myanmar, right? There's a Rohingya Muslim genocide happening right before our very eyes. Yeah, we invade for this and that reason, but we don't invade to actually save people. So that's exactly what that, I'm not saying we should invade, but I'm just saying if we're the world's policemen, we fucking suck at it. So the point is, we're a war society, a war machine, but we have a war president. Okay? So Nixon was famous for saying that the president does it, it's not illegal. So there's a couple things. He is furloughing mostly Democrats, so he's politicizing the fuck out of this immigrant debate. That does seem like that's a genocide or that's discrimination to furlough only Democrats. So he's just saying if you're a Democrat in your government, then you can't work with us. I don't remember Obama sitting there firing a bunch of Republicans. In fact, everybody shit a brick if that was happening. But Nixon said if the president does it, it's not illegal. Again, all Donald Trump has to do is just say whatever his behavior or words or actions or things that he's doing is in the interest of national security. So if he blames it on those 6 immigrants that were terrorists in the last 6 months that were suspected terrorists, right? That's all he has to do. That's all he's got to, if he really, that's a national emergency. There was that one remember there were 6 terrorists that we found in the last 6 months? Even if it was just, some Guatemalan who said he was sympathetic with bin Laden, that's it. That's all he needs. He can wrap his actions and behavior and laws and bullshit up in it's for America, or American interest, or democracy, or national security, which is to make sure he's happy, right? As long as he's happy in our national, if he's not happy, he might just start, pushing the bomb and nuking the shit out of everybody. So since 2001, and then 2003, and then all the other wars that we've started, we have a war on terror, which means that the military can invade any country, entire world, and if they don't defend themselves, if no other foreign nation invades, then we'll get away with it because we're the leading empire. So this is, alarming to me because there's no accountability. There's no accountability for the police here. There's no accountability for and I'm just supposed to trust that what the fuck we're doing in Cameroon? Just trust Donald Trump and the, war efforts that he's doing in Cameroon. Just trust him. He's doing okay. Just trust him. I don't even trust him to run this country, let alone, running Cameroon's affairs. But again, I want to make the point that Donald Trump has unlimited war powers. He's got a shit ton of war powers. George W. Bush had a shit ton of war powers. Barack Obama had a shit ton of war powers. And Donald J. Trump has a ton of war powers. They're essentially emperors. They're emperors with an unlimited amount of war power. Abraham Lincoln, he suspended habeas corpus. So this is a civil war, but Abraham Lincoln, he went into Maryland, and he threw state governments and governors and legislators into prison. So he took the state governors, the government of the state, and he threw them into prisons. So this is a possibility. ICE is sitting there saying that some of these liberal politicians who allow illegals or have a sanctuary city have a compassionate approach to the immigration problem. ICE is sitting there saying we should throw those people in jail. The liberal politicians who run the cities that are so-called sanctuary cities. So could Donald Trump throw those politicians into jail? Could he suspend habeas corpus and throw those? We got a war on terror, everybody. We got a war on terror for the last 18 fucking years. That's the most important war that America's ever fought. The war on terror is the most important war. Only 4 years with the Civil War, only 4 years killing Nazis. The Revolutionary War is 7 years. God, you put all those together, and you still don't even have the war on terror. And the war on terror ain't going to fucking end. The Democrats are sitting there telling him he needs to stay in Syria fucking forever. God damn, all y'all agree with murder. All y'all agree with killing, huh? Nobody wants to say shit about murder. That's the worst crime out here, okay? So I'm not trying to get worked up about the war. All I'm trying to do is just point out what is legal and what is, what's legal isn't always what's moral. So what's moral is not always what's legal. That's, I'll just throw that out there. FDR, he ordered the entire nation to give up all their gold, which theoretically is hoarded up in the Fort Knox. So FDR told the entire nation, if you got gold, you got to give it up because we're killing Nazis. Woodrow Wilson, he invaded Mexico at Veracruz for some reason. Why did we invade Mexico? Why did we invade Veracruz? For some reason, Woodrow Wilson. So to think that we couldn't invade, the south of the border, we've overthrown Guatemala and the Honduran governments. So the only 2 crimes that I could think of that, if the president does it, it's not illegal. That's mostly, I think it's right, but not right. Like it's the way it's going to happen, because who's going to arrest the president? If anybody's going to arrest him, they would have already done so by now. So what I'm going to say about the president and his criminality is that he has a higher threshold to jump over before you actually are able to throw him in jail. Now, there's 2 main crimes that the president can commit that is clearly crimes. I think cold-blooded murder is one thing, but there's 2 kids are dead at the border. And then that one American girl he killed in Yemen. So he's been killing people. So I think we could charge him with murder if you had the courage to do it. But the big crimes of head of states that have happened, if it's not just, it's sufferable versus insufferable tyranny, the King Louis the 16th's crime, the reason why King Louis the 16th and Marie Antoinette got their heads chopped off, the French Revolution, was because they tried to flee the country to go to Switzerland to get some troops to subdue the French people. So the king went to another country to get mercenary soldiers to subdue his, quote-unquote, his own people. Well, the way that Robespierre and the French revolutionaries looked at that is, that's treason. You went to another country to, shoot upon the French? It'd be like, so Donald goes to Canada and gets a bunch of Canadian soldiers to come down to America. If he goes to, China, or if he gets his Russian mercenary friends and they come in to invade, the American people, well, that's treason. That's the mistake of King Louis the 16th. It's overstaying his legal term limit. You're either there for 4 years, unless another person, if another person gets elected, you're only there for 4 years, or 8 years. But that's it, right? If the Electoral College, if those 300 people that only have a right to vote, not the American people, they don't have a right to vote, but the Electoral College, either 4 years, he's in there for 4 years, and then he's got to step down once Bernie Sanders gets elected, he's got to step down. He could say there's a big war emergency. He might try to suspend the elections. He might say, I'm not going to leave the Oval Office. And then, turn this into, his crybaby ways will turn this into, some kind of crazy-ass cult of personality sort of conflict. So I just want to mention that if he wanted to use his emergency powers to shut the border down, because there is whether or not, people are thinking it's porous, that people are just crossing the border over and over again. The bigger thing is that we got 11 million people in this country that's illegal. There's 11 million people in this country that are not supposed, to be here. They were not naturalized as citizens. They weren't born here. They don't have a pathway to citizenship. They don't want to turn themselves in because then they'll get punished and they'll never be able to get a chance to come into again. So, there's 11 million people. What Bill O'Reilly said, Bill O'Reilly didn't want the images on TV. He didn't want the Republicans to round all 11 million illegals up and ship them out because that looks like Nazi Germany, right? Get the trains rounding people up. It's Nazi Germany, ain't it? So just the images. That's why Bill O'Reilly was against it. It was just because of the appearance of the thing. So let's talk about Truman, right? Harry D. Truman. He's no Donald Trump. But Donald Trump and no Donald Trump neither. So Harry Truman, old Harry Truman, he's the one that dropped the fucking bomb. Old Truman dropped the fucking bomb, right? Old killer of Nagasaki and Hiroshima for no apparent reason. He's the 33rd president from 1945 to 1953. He would be after FDR and before Eisenhower. So he's the one that instituted the Marshall Plan. There's also the Truman Doctrine, which was the beginning of the Cold War. His speech eventually sets up NATO. So the Truman Doctrine was that the presidency was to counter Soviet geopolitical expansion. So that was the beginning of the Cold War. Truman gets in there. Now we're going to, make sure that the Soviets don't expand their borders. And we're going to form NATO. And it's an alliance between 29 North American and European nations. NATO is an organization. It implements the North Atlantic Treaty of 1949. NATO's headquarters is in Belgium. So NATO was established because of Henrietta Truman, Harry Truman, and the Truman Doctrine is to stop the Russians from expanding, and then the Marshall Plan. So he spent all that money after World War II to help rebuild Europe. So the Marshall Plan is what actually the Obrador and the Mexicans and some of the Central Americans are working on right now, getting a Marshall Plan from the United States to help their fledgling economies. We did destroy their countries. You might want to, fix that which you destroy, you would think. So there was an Immigration and Nationality Act in 1952. It was also called the McCarran/Walter Act. It was passed during the McCarthyism and the Second Red Scare. So 1952, right at the end of Truman's administration. Now Harry Truman is going to veto the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. So he vetoed the immigration bill of 1952, but eventually the House and the Senate overcomes his veto. And so the Congress, they pushed it forward and they got what they want in spite of what the president wanted. So the president could veto, sure, but if the House and the Senate both want something, then the veto don't mean shit. It's called the McCarran-Walter Act. Pat McCarran started the bill as a bulwark against communism and Jewish interests, so against communism and Jewish interests and other undesirables. So, there was a lot of Jews that were coming into America, especially, well, actually, the World War II is over. Maybe they didn't want to go back to Germany. They're, for some reason, Jewish interest, okay? So this is an anti-Semitic thing, 1952. We just fought against the damn Nazis, and now what? We're being anti-Semitic, and we're going against communists, right? Those damn communists and undesirables. So to throw communism and Jewish in there with those are not undesirables. Those are just, people who believe different things than you. McCarran's power as chairman of Senate Judiciary Committee turned the liberals' voices into meaningless dog shit. So McCarran had a lot of power. He was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was able to get this bill passed. Well, what is this great bill, this Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952 that's passed under the Truman administration? So whether he likes it or not, this is, everything that happens in the country, good or bad, the buck stops with the Gipper, right? So the buck stops with the president. Well, this 1952 immigration law, it increased the review of applying immigrants. They didn't want any subversives. They didn't want any communists. There was more deportations, including Communist Front organizations. So they were deporting not just illegals, but also people who they suspected as being communists. It was a more stringent naturalization law. Now, 1952, immigration law revised the 1924 quota system. So before, we had a quota system. Every country could only, give America so many people, and then that was it. Then they were cut off. So we had a national quota that was set to a rate of 1/6 of 1% of each nationality's population already in the U.S. in 1920. So essentially, more Europeans, right? 85% of the people, the immigrants, are going to be Europeans. It was based on the population that's already in the United States. So since most are Europeans, then the people that can come over are Europeans. So 1/6 of 1% of each nationality's population already in the U.S. in 1920. As a result, 85% of the 277 visas were allotted to individuals of Northern and Western European lineage. Right, Northern, Western Europeans, 85% of them, Germany, Ireland, Great Britain, were allotted 2/3 of the 154,000 visas, 155,000 visas that were allowed. The act continued the practice of not including many countries in the world, such as, I don't know, tiny countries or maybe communist countries. So that's what Harry Truman's problem. Harry Truman's problem with this bill was, even though it was anti-communist, well, there were some communist countries that he wanted to be diplomatic with. So Harry Truman vetoed the 1952 immigration law because it was un-American and inhumane. Specifically, he thought it was racist against Asians as a specific group, and because national origin quotas to nations deemed communist, whom Truman considered allies. So he didn't like that. He was allies with some of these communist nations, and just because they happened to be communist, but then he was the one that started the damn Cold War. So when he says it was un-American and inhumane, I mean, that sounds like some strong-ass rhetoric, considering, he was the anti-communist bulwark, right? He's the one that started the damn Cold War. So big shocker that, all these senators and congressmen are now, rabid dogs foaming at the mouth wanting to hurt some communists. There's 3 preferred groups, those with special skills, the educated, and those with economic potential. So those are the ones that they were looking for, special skills, educated, and those with economic potential. I, kind of don't like anybody. I like everybody, but I don't, in terms of being scarce resources and being competitors for jobs and, resources, why would I want doctors and scientists to come in here? Those are good jobs for, our doctors and scientists. So we're going to sit there and get all these specially educated people into our country, and then take good jobs from our scientists and from our mathematicians and our I mean, Jesus Christ, instead of spending so much goddamn money on educating the entire world, why don't you educate your own people? Anyways, so the three preferred groups, the immigration law of 1954 wanted those with special skills, the educated, and those with economic potential. The relatives of U.S. citizens were exempt from quotas and were admitted without restrictions. If you're related to an American, if you're a wife or the kid, you were just, the families of U.S. citizens were allowed in without question. Average immigration wasn't supposed to surpass 270,000 per year, so that's it. 270,000 per year, and refugees were allowed too. So the refugees, asylum seekers, which I think we should have basically a carpet, blanket refugees and asylum seekers. If they're legit, we need to help people. What the fuck? We're going to bomb the shit out of Syria. The Democrats are going to support the Syrian war, but then they're going to sit there and make sure there are no refugees, right? So they're going to force Donald to stay in the Syrian war, and we're creating a hellhole there, and the refugee crisis. Where are they running to? Not America, because who gives a shit, right? We bomb countries and we destroy worlds, and we don't give a shit if the people run, just run somewhere else, not here. We're allowed to bomb your country, and we ain't going to take none of the people that have been terrorized, either by our bombs or by other people's bombs. We're just not going to help whatsoever. We'll bomb people. We just won't, take your Anne Franks in. Another thing that the 1952 immigration law did was it added Guam to the list of American citizens. So Puerto Rico and Virgin Island native-born were considered American citizens since December 24th, 1952. So they've been considered. So the December 24th, 1952 is when Guam become American. Guam, the people of Guam now could be considered, now we're American citizens. Whereas Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands were American citizens, now Guam is. Guam is added. These are territories, American territories that are not states, but now they're, they're American citizens. So that's what the 1952 immigration law of Harry Truman did. And now let's go to George Washington, the great George Washington. What was old George up to? So George Washington, he wanted, for everybody to be happy, and he wanted to own his slaves and push all the Native Americans out of Ohio to allow all the white people to live there. Get rid of Tecumseh, right? Get rid of the Iroquois. So the Naturalization Act of 1790, this is, George Washington. He owned over 300 slaves, and then he's the one that's dictating what kind of people we should allow into the United States. Well, according to George Washington, they needed to be good citizens, free whites, only free white people of good moral character. So just white, he wanted to make America lily white, very, very lily snow white. That's what the 1790 Naturalization Act of the United States, so the Immigration Act, right, of 1790. That's what he wanted. He didn't want any enslaved whites. If you were a white person and you were enslaved in another country, he didn't want you. Only free whites. No indentured servants could come into America or become American citizens, nor could Native Americans, nor could black people, enslaved or free, nor Asians. Free blacks were allowed citizenship in some states, but not America. You just could not become an American if according to George Washington. And only those free whites with good moral character. If you owned a bunch of slaves and you were raping a bunch of slaves, that was not a strike against your moral character. That actually might have been, George Washington could relate to something like that. The children of U.S. citizens born abroad were known as natural-born citizens. The children of U.S. citizens born abroad were only citizens if the father had resided in the U.S. If not, then no citizenship was extended. So it was sitting there saying that made a distinction between natural-born citizens. If you were born abroad, you were an American, but you were natural-born. You weren't a birthright-born here American. So that was specific. What is natural-born American? It's like John McCain. John McCain was born on a military base in, I want to say, Panama. So he's a natural-born citizen, not a regular-born citizen. The children of U.S. citizens born abroad were only citizens if the father had resided in the United States. So if the father didn't reside in the United States, no citizenship was extended. And what about the mother? I guess it was just about men back then. So to address one's good character, a 2-year residency requirement was needed. This is 1795. 5 years later, they're going to pass it again. They're going to have they're going to pass it to where it was a 5-year requirement, and then 1798 you had to be there for 14 years. So that residency requirement kept getting bigger and bigger. In order to be, to judge a person's character, you had to have been there for at least a year or 2 or 5 or 14, and then with the 14 years, then you could, ask questions, interview people, and try to find out who, what great character these people are. So once they were convinced of one's good moral character for the free whites, then they were made to say an oath to the United States and the Constitution, and then the clerk made them an American. And that's the Naturalization Act of 1790. That was immigration policy by George Washington. This had been right at the beginning of the country. He was in there, 1787 for 8 years, 1787, so this is his first term. So, good thing we got rid of a lot of that shit, the racist bullshit, no Native Americans, no black folks, not even whites. If you're an indentured servant, if you're enslaved, if you had if you're being oppressed, you couldn't have no asylum, you couldn't, so, yeah. George Washington. So, I'm going to put the immigration policy is actually under Reagan. Papa Bush and George W. Bush are very similar. Papa Bush is going to go ahead and double down on Reagan's policies. They're going to consolidate Reagan's policies. So Ronald Reagan, he is president from 1980 to 1988. In 1983, the Supreme Court forbade schools and hospitals to deny services based on undocumented immigration status. I'm liberal, I'm progressive, that's bullshit. That just seems insane to me. So you're not in this country legally, but if they want to go to our schools and if they want to go to our hospitals, we have to let them. They don't have any standing. I don't even see how they have, our laws don't apply to illegals, right, unless they're specifically said to those undocumented, Americans. I think you're allowed to deny schools, and can you deny them to America? I don't know, but to say that you can't deny them, that's a Supreme Court thing. That's crazy. That sounds insane to me. That's why the right wing keep on saying, do you want driver's licenses for the undocumented? No, I don't want driver's licenses for the illegal people. I don't want them to go into schools or hospitals. I don't want them to be scared living in the shadows. If they're good, hard-working people and, they're decent folk, then that's, we want those kind of people. So let's keep those people, but if they're just, just when you're playing in the shadows, I don't know. So Ronald Reagan, Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. He enacted it November 6, 1986. So this is the immigration law of 1986. It's also called the Simpson-Mazzoli Act. The Simpson-Mazzoli Act was also called the Reagan Amnesty. Ronald Reagan give amnesty? Well, not exactly, but kind of. So a little bit. So he did this by executive authority, by proclamation, by edict, by tweet, right? Ronald Reagan says, okay. So you got this, law, 1986 law, that is done by executive authority, right? So by proclamation. The law criminalized, it was 2 parts. One was passed by Congress, and then he adds more. So, what the fuck, right? You're just making up laws. Why do we even have Congress if we're just going to allow the president to write the damn laws? So, the 1986 immigration law, it criminalized the pattern of hiring illegal folks, unauthorized Canadian aliens, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce actually opposed it because it fined businesses. Hey, how dare you fine our businesses? Maybe we might be hiring illegals, and you want to talk about hypocrisy. Didn't Donald get caught with having a bunch of undocumented workers working at his places? So he's sitting there hiring all these undocumented people, and if people are paying attention, then he should have got fined a long time ago. Later on, some affirmative defense clause was added where the employers didn't have to check their hires' paperwork if they hired through subcontractors. So they added a loophole. So if you hired them yourself, you were liable. But if you hired them through subcontractors, well, then it was on the subcontractors. But they're not, business. They're kind of a middleman. There's some affirmative defense clause that made it easier for businesses to where they weren't going to, essentially, it wasn't as strong for the people to go after the businesses that were hiring for the illegals. The I-9 form was introduced to make sure all employees had documented proof of their legal status. The I-9 form, was introduced with the Reagan 1986 immigration law. The 1986 immigration law didn't cover American children, anchor babies of illegal and undocumented aliens, so Reagan issued the executive order afterwards. The 1987